On Christmas Day in the historic year 2002, a West Virginia contractor named Jack Whittaker bought a single multi-state Powerball lottery ticket that completely altered human history. What makes this specific story so entirely fascinating is that Whittaker was definitely not your average desperate person looking for a quick, lucky escape from a cycle of poverty. Before he ever matched those 6 historic numbers, he was already running a highly successful contracting firm that generated roughly $17 million in solid revenue every single year. Yet just a few short hours later, he became the sole, undivided winner of a jaw-dropping $314.9 million jackpot, which changed everything instantly. He chose the immediate lump sum cash payout option, which left him with an astronomical net total of $113.4 million after all taxes were deducted. If you have ever daydreamed about what you would do if a massive pile of unearned wealth suddenly landed directly into your bank account, you probably imagine permanent financial security. You might assume that someone who already understood how to run a multi-million-dollar corporation would easily navigate the sudden arrival of this historic mountain of liquid capital. Within less than 5 years of claiming that massive fortune, Jack Whittaker found himself completely buried under more than 400 separate legal lawsuits and entirely drained of cash. His beloved granddaughter tragically lost her life after being targeted for her wealth. Thieves repeatedly smashed his car windows to steal cash, and his entire fortune vanished completely. The most unsettling part of this tragedy is that Whittaker was not a rare exception, because certified economic data shows that lottery winners file for bankruptcy at double the average rate. There is a hidden psychological glitch wired deep inside your brain that actively forces people to destroy sudden wealth, and absolutely nobody warns you about how it works until too late. I break down exactly one powerful psychological concept per video in plain English so that you can protect your mind and your money from these invisible evolutionary traps. If you genuinely want to understand the hidden behavioral forces that dictate why you do the things you do with money, take a quick moment to subscribe and turn on the bell. To truly understand why massive fortunes melt away like ice cubes under the sun, we must explore a concept discovered by Nobel Prize-winning economist Richard Thaler. Psychologists call this specific mental phenomenon mental accounting bias, and it refers to the irrational way your brain categorizes money based entirely on where it originally came from. When you work a brutal 40-hour week to earn a $5,000 paycheck, your brain automatically codes that specific money as sacred capital meant for survival, bills, and long-term investments. But if you suddenly win an identical $5,000 from a scratch-off lottery ticket or a lucky stock trade, your brain instantly codes it as completely imaginary found money. Because the cognitive effort required to obtain the windfall was practically zero, your subconscious mind treats the entire amount as a free pass to engage in reckless luxury spending. Jack Whittaker fell straight into this psychological trap by driving his brand new Lamborghini through his old neighborhood while literally throwing physical stacks of $100 bills straight out the windows. Think about the last time you received an unexpected tax refund or a sudden cash gift from a relative, and try to honestly remember how quickly you spent it compared to salary. You probably treated that money with far less respect than the money you sweat for, because your brain naturally lacks an objective appreciation for currency that is obtained without labor. Before we get to the most counterintuitive part of sudden wealth destruction, we must analyze the secondary behavioral engine that drives lucky winners straight into a financial graveyard. Human beings are biologically equipped with an evolutionary mechanism known as the Hedonic Treadmill, which means we adapt to new levels of luxury with terrifyingly rapid baseline speed. When you purchase a massive, expensive mansion or a fleet of luxury sports cars, the intense hit of dopamine that you experience fades completely away within just a few months. The devastating trap here is that while the psychological pleasure of your new luxury lifestyle completely disappears, the massive recurring holding costs like taxes and maintenance remain fixed forever. To maintain that identical baseline level of human happiness, your brain forces you to buy even larger, more extravagant things, creating a permanent cash burn rate that eventually consumes principal. What most people never realize is that a massive pile of static capital is not a permanent shield against poverty if you do not systematically convert it into boring cash-generating assets. National Bureau of Economic Research data proves that windfalls do not actually reduce the probability of eventual financial ruin, but they merely delay the collapse while making the final crash bigger. When a regular person makes a massive financial return based purely on a fluke, lucky outcome, their ego immediately convinces them that the gain was due to their own intellect. This toxic illusion of financial genius inevitably drives people to take much larger, highly speculative risks with even bigger amounts of money until their luck runs out completely. But there is a completely separate psychological tax that nobody talks about in public, and it is driven by an uncomfortable social asymmetry that sudden wealth creates with old friends. Your ancient brain is deeply wired for tribal belonging, and when you suddenly acquire millions while your family members are struggling, it triggers an overwhelming sense of subconscious guilt. To ease this constant internal psychological pain, lottery winners begin funding highly unviable business ideas proposed by their relatives, or completely subsidizing the lifestyles of their entire social circle. This is exactly what financial experts refer to as the guilt tax, and it represents a massive social capital obligation that systematically drains millions of dollars through completely unhedged investments. Stay with me for just the next 2 minutes, because what I am about to show you next is the ultimate hidden layer that alters how you must view your own bank account. The primary reason lottery winners lose everything is that they try to preserve their new wealth using the exact same high-energy orientation they used to dream about it. They treat their capital like a raging bonfire that needs constant fueling through flashy moves, instead of recognizing that true wealth preservation is an incredibly quiet process of absolute patience. When you inject an absolute mountain of liquidity into a psychological operating system that has never been trained to manage asset allocation, the entire system collapses under the weight. Most people spend their entire lives learning how to earn money, but they do not spend a single hour learning how to psychologically tolerate the quiet stillness of holding large wealth. This brings us directly to a profound psychological phenomenon known as sudden wealth syndrome, where the recipient experiences immense anxiety, identity confusion, and deep paranoia regarding their social relationships. You suddenly start viewing every single human interaction through a dark lens of transaction, wondering if people genuinely care about your character or if they are simply targeting your resources. To escape this painful emotional isolation, many winners disconnect from reality entirely, using substance abuse or extreme gambling to numb the overwhelming anxiety of their newly fractured identity. If you ever find yourself receiving any kind of sudden financial windfall, whether it is a small inheritance or a massive business exit, you must enforce a strict behavioral framework. The very first rule of wealth survival is to implement a mandatory 6-month liquidity freeze, where the entire amount sits completely untouched in an ultra-safe government bond account. You must allow the intense chemical high and the emotional volatility of the windfall to completely evaporate before you make a single permanent decision regarding your career or your lifestyle. The second mandatory rule is that you must permanently separate your core principal capital from the actual recurring yield that the capital naturally produces over time through market growth. The core capital must be treated as completely sacred land that you are absolutely never permitted to sell, meaning you are only allowed to spend the interest or the dividends. When you commit to living strictly off the boring, predictable yield of your assets, it becomes mathematically impossible for you to ever cross the finish line into total bankruptcy. This requires a massive shift from an accumulation mindset to a preservation mindset, which is incredibly difficult for individuals who derive their self-worth from making flashy consumer purchases. You must realize that true financial freedom is not defined by the ability to buy absolutely everything you want, but by the ability to control your time entirely. When you trade your capital for shiny luxury objects that depreciate in value, you are actively trading your long-term personal freedom for a temporary hit of cheap social validation. The elite institutions who manage multi-generational family wealth understand this deeply, which is why they construct complex legal trusts that explicitly restrict heirs from touching the core principle. They establish strict behavioral guardrails because they know that human biology is fundamentally wired to consume resources rapidly whenever they appear to be abundant in nature. So let us pull all of these critical psychological pieces together to see the full, undeniable picture of how the human mind handles sudden financial abundance under pressure. Your brain naturally categorizes unearned wealth into a dangerous mental account that encourages reckless spending, while the hedonic treadmill continuously raises the baseline cost of your daily lifestyle. The combination of overconfidence from lucky outcomes and the social guilt of out-earning your peers creates a perfect storm that can easily dismantle centuries of generational wealth within moments. Wealth is not a mathematical problem solved by numbers, but it is a behavioral discipline driven by emotional maturity, self-control, and a deep understanding of your own cognitive biases. If you can master the quiet psychological art of doing absolutely nothing when a windfall arrives, you will belong to the elite percentage who survive the hidden trap. Share this video with exactly one person you know who deserves to truly understand the deep, invisible connection between human psychology and long-term financial survival in a consumerist world. Having a serious, open conversation about these behavioral biases could completely alter how they view their own money, their career, and their personal choices for the rest of their life.